Hey, Dove?
It's Dave.
Dave. Okay. I
Hey.
was surprised by the lack of an E. That's
Yeah, I
how's it
mean,
going?
it's a Sanskrit name. It's Dev Brat, but yeah, people call me Dave. It's going good. How about you?
Doing all right, doing all right. I cannot complain. It's
Yeah,
Friday.
yeah, yeah. First of all, thank you for accepting my request for
For
this
sure.
informal interview. I can actually do the assignment early now. So I guess let's head straight to the questions, if you don't mind.
Sure. Sure.
So, yeah, so I have prepared a list of like eight, nine questions. Some are pretty general to your current
Okay.
at Meta. Some like talk about Amazon role and all.
Sure.
And some are like pretty basic and open-ended. And if you feel like you don't want to answer any question, you feel free to pass anytime.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh, my first question is, can you tell me more about your current role as your staff software engineer at Meta and what drew you to this position?
I mean, do you know sort of what a software engineer does day to day?
Yep.
Perfect. So typically with software, the further up you go, the larger the projects that you're coordinating. That's kind of the big difference. As a sort of entry level software engineer, someone tells you exactly what to do.
Yep.
As you become more and more senior, it's more and more ambiguous. And so the role at Meta as a staff engineer is um, taking maybe a couple of lines ideas and then converting them and executing on them. And that's sort of the day to day role. I can't share too many specifics.
Yep.
But what I can say is we're working on improving the WhatsApp Cloud API. So WhatsApp, especially for people not in North America, is a foundational platform for messaging.
Yep.
And one of the ways that WhatsApp makes money is through business messaging.
Yep.
And so we have a team in Toronto of around 15 or so engineers who are focused on how do we build sort of the next generation of business messaging and what does that look like and how do we support these businesses coming onto our platform and things like that. And so I'm helping there, so it would be helping lead some of the projects, trying to figure out what might make sense, roadmap planning, all of that kind of stuff. And then, to be honest, very little time is actually spent writing software.
Yeah.
That's the interesting thing.
So you're kind of at the level where you manage the team and you are like an architect in an architect position for the software, but you do not actually need to write the software itself.
So I'm not managing the team. So all of these big tech companies, you have parallel ladders. So you can manage increasing technical scope or you can manage increasing like organizational scope. It's up to you
Okay,
what you choose.
I see.
So I'm not actually managing anyone. It's just helping guide the project through to completion. And you work alongside a lot of partners, right? So our team
Yeah,
has a manager and we work very closely together.
I
Um,
see.
as with every manager, right? You have like TPMs who help push things through the funnel. You have
Yep.
product managers and product marketing managers who are trying to tell you what the world wants and what might make sense to build. So it's a lot of partnerships. And then what I own would be like the technical quality and resilience of the systems that we build. So it would be helping guide that. But it's not the thing with engineering is it's always a team sport.
Yes.
So it's not any one person. It's just the best way I've heard this explained is at a certain point, you've built enough systems, you've seen enough things go wrong that people will pay you to tell them ahead of time how this will go wrong. And that's kind of the role, right? Um, so like yeah, the team is executing, the team is helping build, they come up with lots of ideas. Your role as sort of a more senior technical person, it's just say, hey, that might have that drawback, this might be easier to do, those are the pros and cons. That's kind
I
of the approach.
I see. Yeah, I was genuinely interested to know about this because when I looked at your LinkedIn profile under Meta, I saw you mentioning the joke like build stuff. Unsure, I just started, cut me some slack.
Yeah.
Like, what does he actually do at Meta? Like, what's actually happening in there? But now I know. It's nice to know that. what the business side of WhatsApp is being developed right in Toronto, unlike in US right now.
I mean, don't get me wrong, there's also an entire team in
Yeah,
San
of
Francisco.
course.
It's not 15 people, it's not
Yeah,
enough for this
of
sort of
course.
project.
Yeah.
But concretely, for example, last year, I spent a lot of time advocating for like security projects. How do we improve the security of our platform? How
Yep.
do we rethink how we do security across the family of apps? All of those kind of security primitives. That's some of the stuff that if you're coding day to day, you probably don't care as much about whether or not this is sufficiently secure and isolated for your clients. But
Yes,
that's a platform improvement that you need to enable reliability at scale.
I see.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So my next question is, so I saw you are an EngPhys major from
yeah.
inside, and right after academia, a bit of physics research and EC research, and then you went straight into software engineering. How difficult was that transition for you?
It actually wasn't too bad. What's your major?
My major is machine intelligence.
Okay, so you're already quite familiar with coding, but even if you're
Yeah.
doing physics, right? A lot of physics today is computational. So you're writing code for a lot of this.
Yes.
The difference with software and programming is that programming, you don't really care about it working for everyone and every use case and being resilient. You just
Yes.
kind of care that your homework assignment works.
Yeah, of course.
And so that's the difference. I already knew how to code. I knew sort of basic data structures. I was, even at that point, very into Python. I was looking into contributing to NumPy and all of these other things. So the programming part, which is really all most people care about when you're interviewing for an entry level position,
Yes.
I had. And that's kind of the case for anyone doing any engineering, right?
Yes, exactly.
So it wasn't that much of a shift. What I would say was a bigger shift was getting used to the professional environment, trying to understand how do you work in a team, right? Like when you're coding for physics, you write a single file that is like 5,000 lines of code and the variables are poorly named and none of this
Exactly.
shit flies. And
Of course.
so it instead becomes how do you write maintainable software? And that became like a passion for me. I'm that
That's
person who
interesting.
will complain about like documentation being out of date, who will spend a lot of time making sure tests make sense and are easy to read. And that's sort of what I care about. As a result of the experience I had transitioning in, it showed me how important some of these things were. So, not that difficult to answer your question. It's just once you have the foundations, which physics does give you, it's all
Okay.
about the soft skills, which are relatively straightforward.
That's nice. That's nice. And before your current role at Meta, I saw you worked as senior software engineer at Amazon, where you started from like performing code reviews and interviews and Scrum, and then you also scaled the Amazon connection system and led a team of 20 engineers for it. So my question is, in what way was that workload different from your current amount of workload at Meta?
They're very similar, right? And this is where technical leadership becomes a thing. Unlike with managing people, where the job gets harder the more people you have to manage, right? So a manager, even a director, when they have like 500 people, they need to figure out what those 500 people are going to do. And there's who's going on vacation. There's a lot of, and you need to make sure everyone's sort of given opportunities to raise concerns. Your job becomes harder the more people you manage. With technical initiatives, which was the role at Amazon, it was sort of two teams. One team working on data lake stuff, another team working on pre-computation and like data governance and all that kind of stuff thrown in.
Yes.
And in that sort of environment, what you're really helping do is lead technical initiatives. And even if you have two teams of 20 people, you have maybe five main technical initiatives that are going on. And you have a lot of really good engineers, right? So a large part of the role in both places is knowing when to delegate, and sort of how who's the right person to get involved. At what points do you want to give some feedback?
Yes.
All of that kind of thing becomes the focus, and that's where the role at Amazon wasn't much more tough in terms of all of the day-to-days than it was at Meta. It's sort of the same role. In fact, Meta might be a little bit harder because unlike with Amazon, where I had 7 years of experience with the tech stack,
Yes,
and AWS is a public offering, Meta's stuff is a little bit more unique. And so it's taking time to ramp up. So in that sense, I am less able to provide concrete feedback
yep,
to the team as I was at Amazon. Whereas at Amazon, it's like I know exactly where the code is, go change this class, change this method,
yeah.
do this thing. At Meta, it's more like, oh, this method must exist. There's no way someone designed this system without doing this. So let's go find it. And once you found it, tell me so we can take a look at it. And then we can try to figure out together what the right thing is.
I see, I see,
And so it's a lot more spike and stabilize at Meta, whereas at Amazon, it was much more execution and roadmap focused. But day to day, it's very, very similar.
I see. And so my research tells me that, and also from what I heard in the industry and all, Meta is one of the fastest paced environment in possibly the entirety of software industry out there. So how do you approach the unique challenges that come across your way in this fast paced environment?
The thing with a fast paced environment, the big challenge with a fast paced environment is managing quality. Because when you're moving fast, in one sense, it's fantastic because you're building products, you're getting them out to your customers sooner. And that's sort of test, like that's your rite of passage. That's your test by fire.
Yes,
When it comes to the sort of managing quality and the risk and figuring out what's the right way to do that, you can't do it as an individual. It becomes about building that technical culture.
I
You
see.
want to have processes in place. And to be honest, Meta has a lot of the processes that you would expect to see. You have tests running, you can ship code whenever, right? You have code reviews, they're mandatory.
Yes,
You have a whole bunch of experts, legal, ethics, privacy, who can help you and let you know if what you're doing makes sense for the end customer. So, in that sense, there's a lot of support that's given that
I see.
enables you to move fast. But Meta, like Google, has this mono repo culture where pretty much anyone can make any change, right?
Yes,
Which is fantastic in the sense that I never have to wait on another team to say that they can do this for me. But at the same time, imagine if you own a feature and some random person comes in and changes it because they need it to work for them. It's like, well, you're not getting woken up at 2 a.m. if something goes wrong. So you probably don't care about the quality. So there's a little bit of playing whack-a-mole where you need to stay on top of changes that are being made to your code base and you need to sort of be aware of when things are changing, but all of that comes up with like regular API design, right? Like if you designed
yes,
your system in a flexible way, then people wouldn't have to come in and change the internals.
of course.
And so that becomes sort of the focus.
Yeah, I
Um,
see.
but day to day, like there's mechanics, right? You don't push through code without testing. You
Yes,
run regular bug bashes. You get reviews from people who've been at the company for a long time who can tell you if you're doing things not just in a way that works, but if you're doing them in an idiomatic way, if you're doing them in the meta way. And
I
so
see.
that's kind of how you leverage the expertise around you to help manage that quality.
Yeah. I mean, the ultimate idea is to write flexible code so that no one has to come in and change the very basics or the foundation of what you wrote whenever they want to add a feature or change something,
And
right?
that's where you have to design by layer almost, right? You
Yes,
have your core layer. If you think of like a messaging platform, your core feature is sending a message from A to B.
yes, exactly.
Then you have wrappers around it to make sure that the person who's authorized to send the message from this number is the one who can send that message. And you have like WhatsApp is end to end encrypted. So you have like the protocol on top of that.
Yes,
And how do you negotiate your certificate and stuff? So as long as you're designing it by layers, it makes it more easy for someone
I,
to
yeah,
reuse a lower layer concept.
yep.
But the one caveat being a lot of times you're not going to need stuff, right? So you don't want to
Yeah.
go overboard
Mm.
where you start building like enterprise FizzBuzz. I don't know if you've seen
Yeah.
that GitHub package.
Yeah. I've seen it.
Yeah, so you don't want to be doing that. You don't want to over abstract. So the trick is just enough abstraction.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate part is there's no trick to that, right? You write code long enough, you'll sort of get a feel for, I think if I do this, it'll stick around for 6 months.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience because I work in a team in one of the student clubs, and we are working on machine learning models to predict like cryptocurrency price changes.
Okay. How's that
And so,
going?
yeah, so we started with a thing where I was like, I can build a data set. So I started a bit of hard coding. This is me back 6 months ago, 7 months ago.
Okay.
And then people came in and they built their systems around mine on like, hey, we want to collect more data. So I'm like kind of created an API and they just added stuff on me. And I suddenly started making base changes in the code that everyone has to change their stuff. And I was like, that's not right. I should make flexible things. If I change something, everyone can still have their code working and they don't have to change the foundation of it. So, yeah, that was my experience. And now I do it like that.
And that's the thing, right? Like effectively, you want to work interfaces backwards. You want to think
Yeah.
about where your code is exposed to the external world.
Yes.
Make sure those are really, really robust. And there's a really good Google talk out there about API design from some of the people who developed, I think, the collections APIs in Java. And those are very well done, right? You
Yes.
don't want additional cruft. And this is the thing with API design. You don't want to say add to a list, and then as a part of the add
Exactly.
method, you have to specify some random attribute. Like, what is the type of this? Like,
Of
no,
course.
I just
Of
want to
course.
add to a list. And so as long as you're building those public APIs in like a very straightforward way, you like users get to compose them
Yes.
in very interesting ways. Like that's all of AWS, right? They have an API that gives you a machine, and someone's like, you know what?
Exactly.
I'm going to get that machine. I'm going to spin up a Docker container. I'm going to do this. And it's sort of, you build on top of these APIs, you just layer
Yes.
it all together. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah. That's the fascinating thing about it because like when I code and like when I try to make like transformer models and all, I'm just
Mhm.
fascinated about it's the same transformer language model that I'm using across different purpose applications. Like sometimes I'm classifying this, other time I'm generating text, but it's always the same thing. And it's built so great that I can query it in different ways and it still works.
Yeah. That's the
Exactly.
thing, right? Once you have
Yeah,
the right primitive, it's so useful.
exactly, exactly. Yeah. So my next question is kind of related to the previous question, except the fact that you don't code anymore. Now you are more of in a different position. So my question is, what strategies do you use now to stay productive and innovative in the industry? So like you don't code anymore, but we also see that newer techniques are coming out for optimization and coding every single year. So what do you do to stay on your top of your game?
For sure. I do code, just to clarify that point. It's just before where I would code 4 days a week, it's probably closer to 1 or 1.5 days now.
Yep.
But I think staying up to date and staying aware of some of the things that are out there, best practices, interesting new research is absolutely critical, right?
Yep.
It's this rule about compounding interest. If I get 1% better every month, then over
Yes.
the course of a year, it's not 12%, it's significantly more.
Exactly.
And so, what I try to do, and I'm not always good at this, but I usually dedicate a couple of hours, maybe 1 or 2 hours, on one day a week to read a whole bunch of industry standard news, right? Like read Hacker Newsletter, read Programmer Digest, read TechCrunch,
Exactly.
it doesn't matter. Read
Yeah.
it all. And I actually collate a lot of that on my website as well,
I
right? So
see.
I have like a list of good reads for this week that I post
Hmm.
maybe at least 2 weeks out of a month.
I
And
see.
so that shows you different ideas and different mental models. And that's really what I'm there for. I'm not there for the concrete, what is the best way to code up I don't know, a buffer reader, right? Like, I
Yep,
don't care.
of course.
Someone will figure that out. Or if I need to work on that problem, I will figure that out.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
I'm more
that's
interested in is give me mental models that I can use,
yep,
more around decision making, right? Because even in soccer, you're making decisions all the time. Should this be a clash? Should this be inheritance? Should this be composition?
of course.
Right? Is this the right way to encapsulate this? So you have a lot of these concerns that keep coming up. And it
Yeah,
comes back to the decisions that you're taking. So there's, I think the Farnham Street blog is fantastic. It shows you a whole bunch of mental models and different ways to think through
yep,
things. But just generally, you want to listen to some of the people out there, right? There's a lot smarter people in the
exactly.
world. And I'm curious to see what people think and consolidate that to a mental framework that I can use day to day as well. So that's how I think about getting better.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just don't lose touch and like leverage the expertise around you. That's honestly the answer for a lot of things.
Exactly. Yeah, I personally follow it's called the ML Engineer. It's kind of like a weekly tech magazine that shows up on LinkedIn. I think it's by AWS and they have some pretty good stuff as well. I like to read that whenever I want to
Yeah,
know what is the recent technology change happening in the industry while also doing stuff in academia.
I think that's honestly a very good habit to build.
Exactly.
And it's not just like there's so many blogs out there. There's the
Yes.
Uber blog, there's the Netflix tech blog, there's
Yeah.
AWS was a bunch of
There's
blogs,
TLDR and IT Brew and stuff. They're amazing.
right? And so Strategy is also really good, by the way, if you're looking at corporate strategy. But if
I,
you look at all of these, they show you different ways. They show you like what problem they were facing and they show you what or how they solved it.
yes,
And it's always fun for me. Before they talk about how they solved it, you spend like a couple of minutes thinking about how you would solve it.
of course. Yeah,
And then you compare notes and you start thinking to yourself, oh shit, I would never have thought to do that. And then the interesting thing is that sort of active engagement leads to the next time you actually thinking of doing that.
yeah,
So it pays off.
yeah, of course. And if you actually see the same thing in your system and be like, hey, I've seen that issue. And
Yeah,
before it actually explodes, you can actually contain the issue before
it's
someone
definitely
exploits
fun.
over it.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. So now something not related to academia or your career. I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you have Highland titles, Lord of Glencoe.
yeah,
Uh, I didn't research into that because I was genuinely interested. What is that? Could you tell me more about it?
sure. It turns out you can buy a vanity square foot of land
Yeah,
in Glencoe. It's a
I see.
national park or something in national conservation area, I think, in Scotland.
I see.
And it was a friend's birthday, and we always joke that he's fancy and stuff. And so
I
I
see.
knew he would love it. So I got him a square foot and the official certificate and everything for him to hang up. Say you are now officially a lord, and you can
I
call
see.
yourself a lord wherever.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, it's only $50 to get a lordship for myself.
Oh.
So I'm gonna do that.
Yeah,
And yeah, that's kind of it. So I just do it because it's such a fun talking point to go, I'm a
exactly.
lord, call me lord now.
Of course, yeah. See, I've recently seen companies show up that now sell like a square inch of land in Scotland, and they're like smaller land, but you can still be lord for like $10. I
Exactly.
was like, yeah, that's pretty interesting out there.
And all of the proceeds go to charity, right? Which
Yes,
made me feel better because it was all about nature conservation.
yes,
It's not
exactly.
a for profit. A lot of these companies that sell like name your planet, name this star, name
Yes,
this asteroid,
yep,
those sort of things, they're complete vanity and they're for profit, right?
yep.
They just keep track of, oh, these are all of the asteroids out there. According to us, you've named it blah.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty funny.
And
Yeah,
so, yeah, in that sense, this was better, but yeah, complete vanity thing. It has
yeah,
zero meaning.
yeah. It's quite interesting. Um, okay, so I have two questions left. So my first one is for students who are inspired by our journey and like interested in pursuing the same career path in software engineering, what advice would you give them to succeed in this field?
I think the two pieces of advice that helped me the most is one, to get your fundamentals right. So my personal favorite book in comp sci, even till this day, is Skina's Algorithm Design Manual.
I see.
I read that before I ever have to interview. It's the one go-to that I always come back to over and over.
Hmm,
Don't get me wrong, like use your own book. Don't use the one that I'm recommending, but
of course.
get one book and make sure you are completely up to date on the fundamentals of like the programming primitives. Like, how is a hash set implemented? How is a tree set implemented? What are the
Yeah.
differences? Right? What is the right approach to take to solve this problem? What are the time constraints? What are the memory constraints? And
Yes.
having all of that information at your fingertips is really going to help when you're starting out, because yes, your code may not be well structured and things like that, but at least it'll be efficient.
Yeah. Yeah, I realized that it was very helpful because while I was giving interviews for finding my jobs for PUI, I
Okay.
started with like lead code problems where I was like, I need to know how to solve it properly. But then I shifted to like, no, I do not need to know how to solve it exactly. I need to know what approach you would use, what algorithms you would use. Because during the interview, you're not asked to fully solve the thing. You're asked to explain the process of how you would solve it, because
Yeah.
they don't ask you to write the exact code. They generally ask us to write the pseudocode, or they are like, can you explain line by line what algorithm or approach you would use to optimize this or that? So that was quite helpful.
And I think that's the thing, right? Like when you're starting out, they may ask for pseudocode.
Yes.
But I can tell you this, when I'm interviewing, it's not pseudocode. It's like write a full working
Yeah,
solution. And that only
exactly.
happens if you have strong fundamentals, right? You
Yeah.
need to be able to get the approach first. I 100% agree.
Yes.
When you look at a problem, you need to have an idea of how to approach it, and then you need to be able to translate that to code. And that's sort of
Exactly.
your bread and butter when you're starting out. That is by far the most useful. But the
Yes.
second thing is to have that learning mindset. I've seen a lot of engineers join a new place and then really struggle,
Mm,
or join right out of school and really struggle. And a large part of that is an unwillingness to listen to the people around them. In part because they might think they learned something at school, they know exactly how something works or whatever. But and they might even think they know a better way. The problem is it may not work in a corporate setting, right?
I-
A super efficient algorithm that is completely ununderstandable is pointless,
yeah, of
because
course.
maintenance is a thing. Something is going to go wrong. If you can promise me you write bug-free software, then yeah, that's
That doesn't
million
happen.
dollar,
That doesn't
right?
happen. Like if there is no bug today, they will probably bug like 2 months from now when systems change and all. So
Exactly. And so
yes.
that's where you want to, when you're starting out, look at the people around you. Not all of them will have good advice, but you
Yep.
want to pick maybe one or two. You want to find that mentorship, and you
Yep.
want to get that feedback, right? You want to ask always, how can I be better?
Yes.
It's it's that thing of like it's that thing they tell you at the gym, right? Like you're not trying to beat someone else, you're just trying to beat your
Exactly.
personal best.
Yeah.
And that
Exactly.
applies. It's that Kaizen sort of, what improvement can I make to
Yeah.
my SDLC? Or how can I become a better engineer? As long as you have that learning mindset and you go in search of feedback,
Yeah.
and let's say you have strong fundamentals, if you have those two, you'll be fine.
I see. Yeah. And looking like back at your career right now, is there something you wish you had learned earlier, and that would have so something that you wished you have learned earlier, which would have helped you succeed better in this field right now?
I think one of the things that helped, or helps anyone speed up their sort of trajectory, is good communication skills.
Yeah.
The ability to get a point across in a coherent yet succinct way is really, really tough.
Yep.
And so what I think you might want to focus on if you're starting out, or what I think might have helped me when I was starting out, is precisely that, being able to communicate better.
I
It
see.
took maybe 2, 3 years to build that muscle, but it's really paid off. I invested a lot into that. And that has been the one thing consistently that people are like, hey, you communicate pretty well. That's helping us get up to speed, or that's helping us get context, or that's helping escalate things,
Yeah,
or helping get initiatives funded. And
exactly.
so, in that sense, it's like that skill that up levels everything.
Yeah, I mean, you want to communicate properly with stakeholders so that you could understand what they want and within the team as well. Otherwise, it's no longer a flexibly working team, not
Exactly.
a good working team, of course. Yeah, that's pretty interesting to know. Yeah, well, that was all of my questions, and it was quite interesting to hear about your experience in the
For
industry and
sure.
stuff. So I really enjoyed it. Uh, I guess that could be the end of the recording for now.
Okay.
And
Let me stop recording then.
perfect.